brings me to another point I just wanted to address, right? Because we've talked many times on here, and it's funny. I'm writing a book right now. I spent the whole afternoon working on this book. I'm trying to get this book done as quickly as I can. It's about a topic that's quite popular. You can probably guess what it's about, but I'm not going to give it away. But, I was buried, and I've got stacks and stacks of books. I've been researching this stuff for years, and I need to just finish this book. Love you, Kinkle. But I need to just finish this book. And so I was kind of buried in my laptop all afternoon trying to finish this book. I've still got like 2.5 or 1.5 more chapters to write. I still need to go over them. But this book is coming along because I've done the research over the years, and it's a topic I know a lot about that's very relevant to current conversations. Let me just put it that way. But one thing that comes up is dialectical materialism, right? And I have said on here for years. I mean, there's a video since before BreadTube, before everything, where I explained what dialectical materialism is. And I gave basically an answer about why at that time I didn't believe in it. And I still don't. But my views on that have evolved. They've become a bit more sophisticated. But basically, I'll just quickly run them down. We want to talk about dialectical materialism and why I don't accept dialectical materialism. What is dialectical materialism? Dialectical materialism is the philosophical foundation of Marxism. Right? Karl Marx was a philosopher before he was a political activist, before he was an economist. It was all on the foundation of philosophy. Karl Marx was a left Hegelian, a follower of Hegel, the German philosopher. And Marx developed his own perspective, which was called dialectical materialism. And the first part of it is materialism, right? That there's a debate about, does the mind create reality, or is the mind simply a reflection of reality? Which came first, thoughts or matter, right? That's the argument, right? The idealists say that thought came first and matter emerged from thought. The most classical form of idealism is religion, the idea that God had a thought, said, let there be light, and the universe came into existence at the will of God, right? It started in the mind of God, in the mind of a deity, and the material world came into existence as a result of God's thought. Also, idealism is also mind over matter. Thinking makes it so, right? The idea that if I think hard enough and I psych myself up, if I really believe in what I'm doing, I can achieve what I want to achieve, right? Mind over matter. That's idealism. Whereas materialism says material came first, and thoughts, feelings, and what we might consider to be the spiritual realm, the emotional realm, these things are merely a reflection of a material world. Thought is inseparable from matter that thinks, right? That's what Friedrich Engels said when explaining the materialist philosophy. He said, thought is inseparable from matter that thinks. The only reason I think is because there's this piece of matter, this material thing in my head called a brain, and a brain thinks. That's the materialism, right? Materialism says matter comes first. Thoughts simply reflect matter. Dialectics is the idea that the matter that does exist is constantly in conflict, confrontation, clashing, and that things advance and the world moves ahead through those confrontations, right? And that is the dialectical materialist school of philosophy that then gives birth to the historical materialist analysis of human history that lays the foundation for Karl Marx and his theories. And I don't accept that. It's funny, I accept a lot of what Marx said afterwards. I accept a lot of what historical materialism says very clearly. But the dialectical materialist worldview, I don't accept. The main reason is that I believe in God, right? And God doesn't fit into materialism, right? I mean, in materialism, God is just something a brain made up. Well, no, actually, I would say that God he comes before any material existence. So I am an idealist in that sense, but further than that, right? I mean, beyond simply the idealism of believing in a higher power and believing in a spiritual realm, believing that my thoughts and attitudes can have an impact, beyond that, the dialectical worldview, I also have issues with. Because, right, and this is the thing, right? So, people say, well, Caleb, Marx, I said, look, if you believe change comes through conflict, that's going to lead to a huge amount of bitterness. That's going to lead to a huge amount of anger, a huge amount of rage, a huge amount of resentment. And I've looked at the communist movement that I've spent my entire adult life in, and I've seen that. I've seen that rage, that hate, that resentment, that, that soullessness that kind of comes through it because they interpret the world this way, right? That it leads to people to this kind of dark, resentful, bitter place. And I've seen that bitter place quite a bit. And I've had dialogue with people about this. And people say, well, Caleb, you're misinterpreting it, right? You're misinterpreting it. Marx wasn't advocating conflict. He was just saying it just happens, right? That's the nature of reality. Well, I would disagree. And that in and of itself is still the problem. If you are a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. If you go through life looking for something and interpreting the world in a certain way, you're going to find what you go looking for. Conflict is everywhere. No question about it. Governments are conflicting with each other. Governments are conflicting with their people. Different factions are fighting. There's class struggle. There's, fights within families. There's fights within neighborhoods. There's racial tension. There's tension between the genders. There's, conflict. Every person in your life at some point has come into conflict with you. There is absolutely conflict everywhere in the world. And you're right that it's not a matter of me advocating it. It's going to be there whether I advocate it or not. However, I would maintain that that is not the only nature of reality, that reality has other aspects. Conflict is a big part of reality. However, it's not the only side. And if that's the only side that we acknowledge, if we define reality as being conflict, and we expect and look for confrontation, we're going to see bitterness. And that there are many examples of realities and relationships that we can point to in the universe that could be interpreted as conflict and could also be interpreted differently. And that they have aspects of conflict in them, but they also have other conflicts. The classic example, I've given two examples when I've made this point before, and the first of which is the solar system, right? We at this point, the what is it? The moons go around the planets, and the planets go around the sun, right? The solar system. Why? Now, dialectical materialists generally point to the solar system as proof of their worldview. They say the gravity of the sun is pulling on the planets and they're pulling around, and the gravity of the earth is pulling on the moon and they're going around there, and it's a pull, and the gravity of the earth and the gravity of the moon and the gravity of the sun, and they're all conflicting. Okay, they're not wrong. But in their conflict or contradiction, what comes out of that is an order that is very predictable, right? I mean, there's a reason that, that we have a year, right? That's one lap around the sun. And with mathematics, we can predict, and there's a reason that we know the cycles of the moon. And that in what you might be able to interpret as conflict, and there is definitely a conflicting aspect to it, there's a very predictable order that has emerged. So is the solar system an example of conflict? Partially, but it's also an example of unity, right? The solar system, if you think about it, is a great example of order, perfect order, the laws of physics in a very predictable way, so predictable that we can make a calendar out of it. And I can't look at the solar system and say, oh, that's conflict. That's just a big confrontation. I can't see it that way. Confrontation and the contradictory gravity, but it lines up perfectly. And I see order in that. I don't see chaos. I don't see conflict. I don't, and eventually, yes, eventually it'll go away. Eventually the sun will go away. Eventually the earth will fade into nothing. Sure. But again, I don't see this as all about conflict. I see kind of natural beauty, the cycle and all of that. So, and if I decide, if I make the conscious choice with my conscious mind to say, I'm going to look at the solar system as conflict, as a big contradiction, that is going to impact the way I see things, right? And I wouldn't be wrong, because that's a big aspect of what's there. But if that's how I choose to interpret it, I'm interpreting the reality in a negative way. And the second example that I frequently give when making this analogy, R-rated, is the sex act, right? Sex. Dialectical materialists generally point to the sex act and say, great example of contradiction. Parts are clashing against other parts in order to create stimulation, etc. Yeah, but generally, the way the sex act takes place, the people aren't at odds with each other. It's not a conflict. In fact, they're doing it as an act of affection and care. And if that's not the case, that's a really horrendous thing called rape. And, the sex act is generally the way our bodies react to it, the way our minds react to it. It doesn't create conflict between people. It generally leads to more unity. So, if you look at the sex, but if you choose to look at the sex act and say, well, what I see is a conflict, you're not wrong. Parts are conflicting with other parts. There's tension there. But that's not the entire nature of the act. But if that's what you choose to see, that's going to impact your whole worldview. And what I have determined is that if you choose to interpret all of reality as a big confrontation, that's going to lead to a very negative and bitter place. And that a lot of what I don't like about wokeness is that that's how they see things, right? It is all about conflict. And, my biggest question to woke people, when they talk about the issues they talk about, the bulk of which are legitimate. White privilege is a reality, right? Men have it better than women. White people have it better than people of color. Obviously rich people have it better than poor people. But my question when woke people talk to me is, what do we do to make it better? Right? And I've noticed that often there's no answer to that. It's just, let's be resentful about it. Well, you have the right to feel resentful. I can't tell you not to feel resentment. You have the right to feel resentment. But if somebody is just helping stoke your resentment, right? If someone's just getting on here and showing you things that remind you of bad experiences that you had that trigger you and make you more upset, if someone's just doing that, right? How are they helping you? Right? Now, if someone's saying this injustice does exist, and here's something we can do to fix it, here's a policy we can implement to fix it, that's beautiful. But the bulk of woke social media content does not do that. It just simply points, and also most of it doesn't really make systemic critiques. It uses the word systemic. They like to use the word systemic, but it doesn't really make critiques of property relations, of the economic foundations of society. It just says, look, there's certain people that have it better than others, and they've got maybe 10% more or 20% more. Maybe they even have 50% more. But they're basically inciting you against people that you would interact with. They're inciting men against women. They're inciting different races against each other. They're inciting different ethnic groups, different religions against each other, different, and basically on the basis of, there are people in your life who have it better than you that you interact with on a daily basis. Be mad at them. Resent them. You have the right to do that, but is that going to change the world, just you resenting them? Right? You resenting them. I mean, you're really mad at these people in your life who have it better than you. Okay. Look, I'm a white male, right? And I admit I have it better than people of color. I admit I have it better than women. But you know what? Even me, a straight white male, there are people that have it better than me. There are people with more money than me. There are people who come from more privileged backgrounds than me. There are people who've had a lot easier time getting through life than me. And, I can do that too, right? And it's good. It would be good if I did that rather than punching down, rather than trying to say, oh, my life would be better if I was black, because that's not true. That's a delusion that a lot of white men like me fall into, right? And that ain't true, right? It would be a delusion if I sat here and said, oh, my life would be better if I was a woman. No, that's not the case. But at the same time, if I just sat around all day thinking about people who've got it better than me, which there are quite a few in this world, right? I live in New York City. I see them all the time. I live in, it's funny. There was a teacher I had in high school who, somebody called him rich, and he said, kid, you ain't seen rich. And it's true. Come to New York City. There's a lot of rich people in New York City. I recently went to a rally, what was it? The Stop Trump Takeover rally. And I interviewed a lot of elderly folks who live near Central Park, because the rally was in Central Park. And, I didn't, generally, when I go and cover protests, I'm not there to debate and argue with anybody. I'm just there to document that the event happened. You know what I'm saying? And there's too many people who go to protests and they try to own people on videos and stuff, and it's not helpful. I'm just there to document that the event happened. And so I interviewed a number of elderly folks who live near Central Park, about Trump. They don't like Trump. They think Trump is this. They think Trump is that. Those people have had it better than me, right? They have definitely had it better than me. Yeah. And, I mean, I could sit around hating them all day, but does that change anything? Me hating them, right? And that there is, again, this is the thing I get back to about preaching without teaching, right? If you're just appealing to emotions and feelings that people already have and stoking them up, you're not helping them understand the world. You're not offering any solutions. You're just stoking resentment. You're really not part of the solution, and they say if you ain't part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And that a lot of social media content, that is all it does. It just stokes resentment. And that's the right and the left, right? I like to pick on the left because that's my background and I've evolved over the years, but the right too. Look, Laura Loomer, Laura Loomer is somebody who grinds my gears. I look at Laura Loomer, and she stokes resentment against Muslims 24 hours a day, right? Are there things that go on in Muslim countries that aren't great? Sure, just like there are things in non-Muslim countries that aren't great. But what she does is she has a layer of people that are pro-Israel, that are pro-Trump, and she just stokes their hatred and resentment toward Muslims all day long. She's not teaching them anything. If she gives them any fact, it's just something designed to fire them up. It's not helping them understand reality. And she just stokes resentment against Muslims all day long. Is she helping the world in any way? No, she's not. And there's a lot of social media content, but that's what gets rewarded, because, if you see something, if someone teaches you something you didn't know, it's nerve-wracking to retweet it, because what if it's not true? And you just heard it for the first time. You don't know. I mean, is this really the way it is? I don't, but if somebody just reinforces anger that you have and all your friends have, oh, you feel validated. Somebody else is angry about what I'm angry about, so you retweet it. Your friends who are, angry in the same way that you're angry, they retweet it, and it just becomes this cycle. And now we can all be angry together. We can all be hateful and angry together, hateful and angry, and so there's a lot of hate and anger all over the social media, coming from the left, coming from the right, and no one's learned anything, and no one's offering any solutions, and no one is listening to anybody else, and we're all just hateful and angry, and the world doesn't get better. So, that is a problem. And I maintain that I must actively work to not interpret the world around me as constantly a confrontation, even though there are loads of confrontations all around me every day. I mean, I live in New York City. I live in America. I live in the planet Earth. There's loads of confrontations and, contradictions and clashes taking place all around me all the time. And same for you. But there's also loads of people being nice to each other. There's also loads of things that fit together well and seem to be in balance. And that conflict is part of reality, but it is not the defining nature of reality. I am actively choosing to not see the world that way, because I want to have better relationships with other people. And I want to play a role in this world of making people feel better and feeling like they belong and giving people solutions and goals that we can come together and work towards. And so, I just will not accept the dialectical worldview, not simply on the basis of believing in God, the materialism part, but also the dialectical part, right? I don't want to see the world as just a big mess of conflict and contradiction and then just an endless struggle and endless confrontation, because not everything fits that way. And that if the whole world is like that, it's not a very nice place. It's not a very nice place. And that I feel that a lot of the bitterness and resentment and rage that I've seen over the years, and a lot of the pain and bitterness that I've seen from people who've really gone all in on that worldview, comes from actively choosing to interpret the world around them that way. That's what I think. And I, you know, I, and so I really am into Wallace Wattles, right? I really love Wallace Wattles stuff. That's really, really good stuff. And I would really encourage people to not think on the competitive plane. I would really encourage people to really think, though, right? Go into your mind, but learn to think in a certain way. Learn to let the one thinking stuff that the universe is made of take expression through you, right? And find the creativity within yourself, the hand of God, the creative thinking stuff within yourself, and allow it to work through you to create beauty and abundance in this universe. And that's what I would urge you to do. And I would urge you to go read The Science of Being Great, The Science of Getting Rich, Jesus, the Man and His Works, The Making of the Man Who Can. I would urge you to read all of that stuff, and you'll find that that stuff is very socialistic. It invokes Eugene Debs. It talks about how eventually the working class will control the means of production, right? But the road there is learning to think in a certain way, and learning to understand how to unleash the creative side of yourself, and how to be one with the universe, and how to let God express himself through you, and understand that you are just part of the thinking stuff that all the universe is made of, the one substance. I find that particular worldview, to be very, very, very inspiring.